LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, was invented by Albert Hofmann. Sat on the shelf for a while, and then he accidentally took a small amount, had an effect, took what he thought was a small amount the next day. It turned out to be 300 mics, which is a huge dose. A normal dosage on the street today is about 100 mics. So he took 3 times that and had a very interesting bicycle ride home that is now recorded in history. And people still celebrate Bicycle Day. Now, as a result of that experience, Sandoz, which was the company that was making LSD at the time, realized it had a huge potential, but they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what the potential was. So they actually sent it out to psychiatrists around North America and Europe and basically asked them, what do you think of this molecule? They, as a result of R. Gordon Wasson's discovery, that's in quotation marks, of psilocybin, he went down and met Maria Sabina. And through that process, Albert Hofmann also had access and purified psilocybin, which Sandoz also sent out. So Sandoz sent out to psychiatry psilocybin and LSD, and Albert Hofmann also knew about mescaline. So original researchers were given 3 of the 4 classic psychedelics. They were given mescaline, they were given LSD, and they were given psilocybin. The initial work was done with mescaline. And Albert Huxley's work, The Doors of Perception, was based on the mescaline experience. The researchers then explicitly decided not to work with mescaline, and they did write about that. And what they said was it was too long acting. So then they had psilocybin and LSD. And then a number of years unfolded, specifically about 17 years. And at the end of that 17-year period, the researchers were using LSD almost exclusively. Now, I've really tried to find out why. And the closest that I've come up with is they saw it as an effective medication. It did work well for what they were researching it for, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it also had it was a novel molecule that had no lineage. So it didn't have an indigenous lineage, and it was disconnected from anything that they had even heard about. They were aware that there was a lineage with psilocybin. So both, they saw it as an effective molecule. They saw LSD as an effective molecule, and it was fresh, new, exciting to them, and disconnected from any history. So at the end of that 17-year period, they were almost exclusively publishing on LSD, which I find absolutely fascinating. And if there was one conclusion from that period of time, is they saw LSD as helpful for alcoholism. Now, the history to that was they originally noticed that it produced a somewhat delirium tremens-like experience, delirium tremens being the withdrawal from alcohol, that can have people hallucinating. You can see things when you have a DT. You can see, all kinds of images that are sometimes very scary. And so they thought, well, if alcoholics can be scared straight by the DTs, why don't we allow them to have or give them an experience of hallucinating that will then scare them straight, and they don't have to be scared straight by withdrawal from alcohol. That was their theory that they went into it with. And what they found is, yes, people stopped drinking, but they weren't scared at all. In fact, they had profound mystical and spiritual experiences, and then people stopped drinking. So that research became complex and actually quite interesting where they took it. And eventually that was one of the conclusions that came out of those over 1,000 studies were published during that period of time. That was one of the stronger conclusions. I've actually gone back and analyzed that literature and found that I think they've actually missed something that I think is really interesting, and I'd like to generally talk about, and I'm busily publishing a paper on, is they also gave LSD to a lot of people with schizophrenia, and they had mixed experiences. And so I have gone and tried to understand what those mixed experiences were. And I have a belief, and my belief is that if you look at all of those papers, when people gave large dosages of psychedelics to people with schizophrenia, it was destabilizing and disorienting, and nothing but problems happened. But when they gave very, very small dosages to those same people, it was periodically beneficial. Now, my partner, my wife, is a psychiatrist. And as I was writing this up, she leaned over my shoulder and read what I was writing and said, "Do you know what you're seeing there?" And I said, "No. What do you see?" And she said, "Schizophrenia has two manifestations. So there are the positive manifestations, which are the delusions and hallucinations, audio, visual hallucinations. And then it has negative symptoms, which are the inability to experience pleasure, social withdrawal, and an experience of disconnection from others." And what she said is, all of the positive experiences that you're observing in that historical literature are all treatment for the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. And she said, as a psychiatrist, she can treat the positive symptoms and she can't treat the negative symptoms. So my belief is that a low dose of LSD may be helpful in the treatment of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Well, a microdose is defined as 1/10 of a normal dose. A normal dose of LSD is, let's say, a normal street dose is about 100 mics. So a microdose is about 10 mics. Yeah. Now, that's actually a complicated question you've asked. It isn't simple to answer that. And partly it's not simple because it's a little unclear as to whether people with schizophrenia have a much higher resistance to LSD than normal people. And there's some debate about that in the historical literature. So how people tolerate the experience is unclear. If I was giving you a simple answer to that question, I would say between 10 and 50 mics. But I don't know how the eventual research, when decades from now all the research is done, how that will actually unfold, I don't know. So one of the differences between LSD and psilocybin, and one of the advantages of psilocybin, is it's shorter acting. It's 6 hours as opposed to 8 hours. So I've actually asked a lot of people who've taken both LSD and psilocybin, how would you describe the difference between the two? And I have had a huge number of responses, and there's some papers that have been published and some sort of anecdotal attempts to gather that knowledge as to what is the difference. And it's actually really hard. It's a bit like, how would you describe the difference between a lemon and a lime? You know, it's actually pretty tough to describe the difference. You know that they're related to each other when you try lemons and limes. You know that they're different, but how do you describe the difference? It's actually tough to do. The obvious thing is LSD is longer lasting. Personally, I believe that it's a preference thing. Some people will find LSD to be more beneficial for some indications, and some people will believe psilocybin will. When all psychedelics become legalized for therapy, I believe some therapists will provide psilocybin and some will provide LSD, and it will simply be a personal choice thing. There is no strong evidence that says the one is better or worse than the other. My belief is it's just preference.